If you're having any troubles with the audio or problems, I do recommend calling in and having the image on your laptop or your tablet, but listening by the phone. We will do a moderated discussion at the end of the evening, so if you do have any questions, we do recommend chatting those into the chat window. My one ask, though, is that you please do not try to answer questions that people have asked, as it can be very distracting, both for our moderators and people typing in questions. And like I said, this webinar is being recorded and put onto our YouTube channel and on our website under the Past Webinars tab. That should be up by tomorrow. Up right now is our agenda for the evening. Our speakers for tonight are Representative Jen Benson, Representative Joan Moschino, and Oriana Riley from MCAN. And again, at the end of the evening, we will be doing a moderated discussion. To begin with here, I'd like to introduce Henrietta Davis from the MCAN board to talk a little bit about MCAN itself. But before that, Henrietta, are you here with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I'm not really sure how this is working, but I just want to welcome everybody to the call and tell you that MCAN is developing a legislative action team, and part of our activities are these briefings, and what we really like you to do is join with us, keep connected with us so that we can alert you when there's a time to be in touch with your state reps or others or state senators, and so we can join together as a team to go forward in this legislative session. We have probably another 14, 15 months before much of this legislation comes to forward for a vote, and we'll need your help all along the way. So please, I think Drew's going to tell you how to sign up at the end to stay connected. Please do sign up and do connect up with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrietta. I'd also like to recognize we have Janet Bowser, the head of the MCAN board, on our webinar with us tonight. But I'd like to get started and introduce myself. I'm Drew Grandy, the Clean Energy Program Director with MCAN. MCAN was founded in 2000, and we are a learning network of chapters across Massachusetts taking action to solve climate change. We have 50 chapters representing more than 75 cities and towns, and if you're not already a chapter, we'd be happy to welcome you to our local groups. We focus on climate solutions and do everything from helping groups get climate-friendly bylaws passed through town meeting or city councils to giving you all a voice at the state level on policies and programs. Tonight's webinar is about how you can be involved in helping move forward that climate legislation, from the Roadmap 2050 bill, carbon pricing, to proposed bills affecting municipal light and power plants. This is the second in our series of legislative conversations. Our first one is posted on our website, which covered 2 net zero bills and the future of a sustainable transportation. Our next legislative conversation webinar will take place in mid-April, and we'll cover 2 environmental justice bills as well as the 100% clean energy bill. But for now, we're looking forward to getting started here. Our speakers for tonight are State Representative Jen Benson from the 37th Middlesex District, talking about the green infrastructure and reducing carbon emissions bill. State Rep Joan Moschino talking about an act to create a 2050 roadmap to a clean and thriving Commonwealth. And Oriana Riley, our MCAN's Municipal Light Plant Program Coordinator, discussing a couple bills that are affecting municipal light plants. Right now, what I'd like to do is hand it over to State Representative Jennifer Benson to talk about House Bill 2810, an act to promote green infrastructure and reduce carbon emissions. Representative Benson, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Thank you very much. The show is all yours.
Great, thank you. So hi everyone and welcome. I'm really excited to have to be joining you tonight, and I'm here in my State House office and looking forward to having a discussion about carbon pricing. Great. So we can start with the slides. That would be fantastic. Great, thank you. So my bill is House Bill 2810. It is a slightly different bill than the bill I filed last year. So if we want to get to the first slide, we'll start talking about the bill and why it's a little bit different, and we'll take it from there. So, so carbon pricing is something I'm sure now all of you, because you're very educated environmentalists, know what it is. It's a way of putting a price on a ton of carbon emissions. And we do this already, sort of, through Regi, through a cap and trade system, but this is slightly different. This is a carbon fee and rebate system. And the idea is that it would internalize the externalities of carbon emissions. And so through this, we are hoping to address some of the environmental and health impacts of carbon emissions. So the next slide. So my bill starts with a $20 per ton a fee on carbon emissions. It goes up to $40 per ton over 4 years. And then if we still don't meet our targets that were in the Global Warming Solutions Act, it would continue to rise by $5 per ton per year. 70% of all fees collected would go back to consumers and employers. And we strengthened, one of the big differences between last year's bill and this year's bill is that we really worked to strengthen the environmental justice aspect of the bill, really protecting low and moderate income folks throughout the Commonwealth. So if we go to the next slide, so like a typical carbon pricing policy, this would collect fees for each ton of carbon emitted, and then rebate some of those fees back to households and businesses. Households, their rebates would be based on the size of the household, so every adult receives a full rebate and every child would receive a half rebate. There are protections built in for low and moderate income households, as well as rural residents who have to use cars for transportation because they don't have public transportation options available to them. And the rebates would be tilted toward the low and moderate income households, which means most households in the Commonwealth would either come out ahead or hold steady, and there would be no fiscal impact on them. Employer rebates are based on the number of employees, and most businesses would actually come out even as well. There are some additional considerations for Massachusetts-based businesses that have a lot of competitive pressure, such as manufacturers, which is one sector we're trying to keep in Massachusetts. And so there is some leeway that would be allowed in regulation to slightly change those rebates depending on if it's a highly competitive industry or an industry that we're particularly trying to hold on to in Massachusetts. And then households and businesses can spend those rebates on anything, but the hope is, along with these rebates will come information from the state, and we're hoping that they will put these rebates to good use for energy efficiency, green energy, and other ways of reducing your carbon footprint. So in the next slide, this is really the biggest difference in my bill compared to some other bills that have been filed, is that it's revenue positive. And I'm really excited about this. So 30% of the fees collected from this carbon price would go into a green infrastructure fund. This fund would be used to finance public transportation, climate resiliency, energy efficiency, municipal energy projects, and it's not a small amount of money. We're talking about, in the first year of implementation alone, at the lowest per ton price, we're talking about $300 million. And just think about how much good we could do with these funds as compared to today, which we have very little funds from the state going that are dedicated for this purpose. So 40% of those funds would go to communities with an average medium income in the bottom 33%. So not only have we weighted the individual rebates by income, but we're actually weighting the Green Infrastructure Fund by need as well for entire communities. So Massachusetts has done a great job of reducing carbon emissions, but we really need to go further. So, we're really looking at places where our current programs and incentives haven't been able to break into, whether that's rental properties, multi-unit dwellings, or simply municipal buildings. So, this provides us with a large pot of money to really invest in sort of the future of the Commonwealth. So, that's what I think really sets this bill above others. So, in the next slide, you can see, some of the reasons why I felt really strongly about going with a revenue positive approach. Because many of my colleagues felt that a revenue neutral bill might be easier to sell to the public. And when it's, revenue positive, people, of course, are going to call it a tax. My concern, though, is that we are falling farther and farther behind of where we need to be in order to really make a difference for the future of not only the Commonwealth, but our Earth. And so being more ambitious and more aggressive in how we work toward meeting the challenges of getting to eventually a carbon neutral future is really important. And so having really bold public dollars to invest is vitally important. So we're not the first ones in the world to have this idea. Finland was the first country to establish a carbon fee in 1990. The EU established the first cap-and-trade system in 2005. And of course, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative with New England states plus New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware established the first cap-and-trade system in the U.S. in 2009. And when I got to go to the UN climate talks last year in Bonn, Germany, many countries were taking this on as something they wanted to work toward. So we are not at all the first to consider doing this. And so if you look on the next slide, you can see, according to the World Bank, there are currently 54 carbon pricing policies in place in 44 countries around the globe. In implementing a carbon fee, Massachusetts would be joining Canada, the majority of the European Union, Mexico, and several South American countries as well. So we would be really linking hands with the world in taking our effort around establishing a carbon-free economy and a carbon-free future with many other countries around the globe. So data shows that carbon pricing has a substantial benefits, and we have strong evidence that it works, and it leads to not only dramatic reductions in emissions, but actually creates economic growth for the places where it has happened already, and we're looking forward to the similar thing happening here in Massachusetts. And so in the next slide, we see the evidence. So Denmark adopted a carbon pricing in 1992. Not only did they cut their emissions by 37%, they still grew their population and their economy in that time. Right here in the U.S., Regi has been found to directly be responsible for at least 25% reduction in carbon emissions around electricity generation. And studies have shown that the economic and health benefits of carbon pricing in Massachusetts would be significant. According to Harvard University, within just a few decades, emissions would be reduced enough that hundreds of lives would be saved, and the savings to the state and health care costs would be in the billions. And right now, serving as the chair of healthcare financing here in Massachusetts, that is certainly something that is important and that we're struggling with every day, is how do we rein in healthcare costs? And of course, one big obvious reason is to keep people healthier, and this would help us do that. So advocacy, and I know I'm going through these very quickly, and of course I'm happy to answer questions, and you'll have the video and the slides for this to reflect back on. But the most effective thing you can do to be an advocate for carbon pricing is to reach out to your state elected official and tell them that you want to support House Bill 2810, an act to promote green infrastructure and reduce carbon emissions. Last session, my carbon pricing bill had 59 co-sponsors. This session, we almost doubled that to 105 co-sponsors, including more than half of the House of Representatives. But that means there are still many more reps and senators who haven't expressed their support for carbon pricing. You can check to see if your elected officials are co-sponsors by visiting malegislature.gov and searching for the bill. You can also track the bill online to see when it is scheduled for a hearing. You can attend the hearing, or you could submit written testimony to the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. And I just want to say that carbon pricing is complicated. And that's one of the things I hear from my colleagues all the time is, I think one of the main reasons we have been able to go from so many more co-sponsors this session is we've done a lot of outreach, both from my office and from, of course, all of you and constituents. But we have a lot of evidence to show that this is one of the biggest tools we have to addressing climate change and reducing our carbon emissions moving forward, which we know is critical. And so, it's going to take some political will and courage to push this forward. But if you look at what we're doing here in Massachusetts, I think we've always been comfortable with being on the forefront. Also, this bill is being used in about 18 other states at this point as a model for how carbon pricing can work on a state level. And I've been very actively working in organizations to help support those efforts and to find ways to work with other states to create markets potentially together into the future. So this is the end of my presentation. I'll be available for questions after all the presentations, so thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Benson. Also, as a reminder, the chat window is open if anyone has any questions, and we look forward to posing those to Rep. Benson on the carbon pricing bill at the end of this. But right now, I would like to introduce Rep. Joan Moschino to talk about the Roadmap 2050 bill. So, Rep. Moschino, if you're ready, we are ready for you.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for including me today. I'm delighted to be here to talk about my bill, which is the 2050 Roadmap to a Clean and Thriving Commonwealth, and that's House 832. To Rep. Benson's earlier point, it is a complex subject matter, but in fact a pretty simple bill. And if you want to advance the slides, I can walk you through it. So essentially, the bill boils down to a comprehensive revitalization of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And what it really does is it's updating the GWSA's goals to net zero emission by 2050 and requiring a backcast analysis, which one would hope would lead to an iterative process and create an intentional and equitable plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It calls for accountability in its implementation and more transparency through more aggressive reporting requirements. But really the point is that the bill creates a much needed people-centered framework for Massachusetts and a path to achieve the greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, and as Rep. Benson very articulately described, to create a clean environment and what I'm confident will be a thriving economy, a green economy. So just a little background. I mean, I don't need to tell this group that climate change and sea level rise are real. But I think, and we've been dealing with them for many years now, and you hear especially people in the coastal communities like myself talk about the need for infrastructure, adaptation, resiliency investments, and things like that. And I'd just like to point out that we really are at this moment at an inflection moment. And what it really, the way to think about it really is what we do today and where we invest our money today is what our stranded costs will be for the next 30 years. And what we do today will really speak to whether we can achieve our goals or not. And I firmly believe we should not be investing in carbon-based infrastructure, but we should be looking ahead and embracing what's coming down the line to us to achieving these kinds of goals. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Global Warming Solutions Act was enacted in 2008, it's Chapter 21N. It is governed by, managed by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and it's simply stated a commitment. We made a commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. The GWSA created a framework and that is managed by EEA and its agencies, and they are supposed to be coordinating to achieve those goals. Next slide, please. And in fact, the GWSA focused initially on energy, sort of greening the grid, as we say. And over the past 10 years, in fact, a number of initiatives have been taken. You heard Rep. Benson talk about clean energy standards, Regi, RPS, procurement, things like that. But also we're starting to see activity in other sectors as well, things like stretch codes, resiliency investments. And these have made Massachusetts a leader. But after 10 years, it's time to start thinking about what the next steps are. And I'm sure you're all very well aware of the IPCC report that has come out in the intervening time frames. And basically, what I think it's shown is that the GWSA got us pretty far. And we have taken some of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. A lot of it has done with power generation, developing renewables, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, there's still no comprehensive plan in place. And as Rep. Benson mentioned, it's questionable whether we will actually make that initial 2020 carbon emission goal. But it's really more than about just energy. It's really about starting to get into other sectors. And with the IPCC report, the key finding, the key conclusion was that to limit global warming, you had to keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius. And next slide, please. And the key recommendation, key recommendation to do that was in fact to reduce the carbon emissions, and the goal that they recommended, and it's based on consensus among the scientific community, was for net zero by 2050. So next slide, please. Actually, keep going, one more. Keep going.
Nice set.
There you go. So the 2050 roadmap bill, essentially what it does is it resets the GWSA's goal to net zero. That would be the new target, would be net zero carbon emissions. It would require the administration to do the backcast analysis, to do the math, figure out what the end goal is, and work your way backwards over time so you would know what the schedule of carbon emission reductions needed to be, and to create a plan across all sectors, engage across all sectors. We're going to invest millions and millions of dollars in our green infrastructure, and there is a framework, but we need to see what the actual plan is. Next slide, please. So the key point of my bill is intentional planning. And the reason I say it that way is I think Rep. Benson really talked very nicely about focusing on people and making sure that it's something that really can engage across all economic sectors. So as you're thinking about things like the multiple pathways, it would be energy, transportation, home efficiency, conservation, carbon capture, land use, all of those kinds of things. Next slide, please. And at the center of all of this planning would be people. You know, I feel that we need to, you know, I put environmental justice on here as well. My bill doesn't really talk about what that would mean. It really is just a reference to an executive order, and there's a number of bills that are out there that already are proposing what environmental justice would mean. But the point of it is to protect moderate and low-income households, so that any steps we make, any strategies we implement, any investments we make, start first and foremost with the people that they should be serving. Absent options, it is just a fee on people who can least afford the money. This is something that I think will not only reduce the carbon emissions to save our planet, but will make for healthy environments. And we know that over the past 10 years, with the GWSA in place and the strategies that we have taken thus far, we know that there has been investments in the economy, and we have added, I think the recent report came out at the end of December, 110,000 new green jobs. So it's all of these things, and at that center is people, or it should be people. Next slide, please. The other thing that this bill will do is create some transparency and accountability. So it's adopting strong 2030, 2050 emission limits, but it's also requiring comprehensive regulations. We propose by 2022, hopefully that would be realistic enough, but it would also require implementation progress reports on a much more aggressive schedule. And the idea is really to have transparency so people can see what the plan is. You know, it's a framework that will advance a lot of other initiatives and bills that have been filed at the State House, programs that the administration is interested in, but also accountability to make sure, I mean, there's urgency that we take action, especially in the next few years, so that accountability piece is critical. But I would argue there's a third component, which would be to make for an iterative process. You know, I wouldn't ever say I was the smartest person in the room, and certainly not the most knowledgeable. And I'm sure that there are amazing ideas and strategies out there that will come down and come along through research and science. So I think that creating a process that would be iterative would actually be a critical component to achieving our success. The next slide, please. And then finally, the last piece that I wanted to point out to you was relative to the implementation of the Act. There were a few pieces that we did include in here. We did include market-based compliance mechanisms and a reference to carbon pricing, but knowing that Rep. Benson and others have filed bills, we don't discuss it, we just reference it, and we'll leave it to her good advocacy to say what that would be. We propose a fee on the top carbon emitters. There are currently 296 entities that are tracked by the Global Warming Solutions Act, and we're proposing a sliding scale fee to raise the money that would give the administration the ability to hire the staff to do the work, to actually put this forward. And then this bill also purports to engage the municipal light plants. They were not included under the prior iteration of the bill, and this would just, it's a very simple section that just says, you're in, you are, the secretary has authority over you to regulate you, and if you need to find individual plans to figure out a way to get your municipal light plant into compliance by 2050, that would be fine. So it's just a nod to the fact that we should really be engaging across all sectors. And then finally, last slide, please. The advocacy strategy. So the way we have approached this, our key external advocacy partner is the Conservation Law Foundation. David Ismay is an amazing advocate. and he's been wonderful to work with. And what we did was we started this conversation back in July, and we drafted the bill, which I should mention is a redraft of Chairman Frank Smizek's bill from last session. Obviously, he's retired, and I'm very honored that he has shared this with me and given it to me to continue his work. But what we did was we updated it and we shared the draft across stakeholders, key people that we felt that would be, potentially interested or concerned about this: labor, business, the administration, utilities, Eversource and National Grid, House leadership, and environmental groups. We've talked to all the environmental groups, and we very much sort of took this as a conversation to see what people thought, to see what their reactions were, to hopefully get feedback. To their credit, the municipal light plants are the only ones that actually actively engaged with us, which I just took as a huge positive sign that they agree that this needs to be done and want to find a way to do it consistent with their business model, which was really exciting. But nobody opposed it. Nobody got upset with it. Nobody sort of, pushed back on us. Certainly, people had questions, thoughts, ideas, but it was very much a dialogue. And part of that dialogue was also with our House members. This is solely a House bill that is purposeful, and we have been having a conversation with leadership, and we are starting to go member to member to explain it to them, to educate them on why it's important, why there's urgency, and why they should be interested in it. So it was actually really delightful, Henrietta, to hear you say that you're putting together a legislative action team. I think probably one of the most important things that everyone could do today is to call your state representative and to make sure they're aware of the bill and to educate them about its importance and its elements, and to ask them to seriously consider to support it. We do have over, I think it's 58 co-sponsors. It's filed, it's in front of Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture, and we've asked for an early hearing. So I'm happy to answer any questions when the speakers are all done.
Thank you, Rep. Mosquito. We look forward to having you for our discussion at the end of this. But for right now, what I'd like to do is introduce our next speaker from MCAN, which is Oriana Riley, who is our Municipal Light Plant Program Coordinator. Oriana, if you're present and ready, we are ready to hear from you.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Oriana Riley. I believe some of you have probably been in contact with me before. I work pretty much exclusively on municipally owned electric utilities. So for those of you not familiar, those are, there are 41 of them in our state, and they are publicly owned nonprofits in comparison to investor-owned electric utilities such as Eversource and National Grid, which you might be more familiar with. So I'm going to actually be talking about, actually you can go back one too. So I'll be talking about a bill that we are asking advocates to make sure their representatives know is actually not a helpful bill. We just heard Rep. Miskino talking about municipal light plants being included, and I'm really glad to hear that they have been responsive to the stakeholder engagement in the Roadmap to 2050 bill. And so there are basically two bills that would update municipal light plants being included in our electricity, and then there's one that might at first seem like it's doing that, but it has a lot of issues that we want to make sure advocates are aware of and representatives are hearing from advocates about. You can go next slide. So a little bit of background. Up until Well, currently 15% of our electricity is exempt from all of our climate and clean energy standards. So that's the renewable portfolio standard, the clean energy standard, energy efficiency programs and regulations, basically any requirements related to climate or clean energy, they're exempt. So if you hear things that we're doing really well as a state, they usually don't include 15% of our electricity and the buildings that are served by those utilities. So, but the exciting thing is that now is actually a critical turning point. It seems like the conversation has really shifted from whether or not municipal light plants should participate in the solution to how they're going to participate in the solution. And we saw that a little bit with what Representative Moschino was talking about. You can learn more about this issue in depth and a bunch of research that we did at our website on vip.ly/MLP report if you want to know more background information about this. Next slide. All right. So there, like I said, there are two bills that aren't exclusively focused on munis, but that do include munis. So if you're calling your representatives about those bills already, if you can add that you want to keep that muni language included. And they meet the criteria of being helpful for moving municipal light plants forward with clean energy solutions, because they are enforceable by the Secretary. So the Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs has the final say over the Global Warming Solutions Act, and therefore can look at what the municipal utilities are doing and make sure that it's bringing us to our collective goals. The second really, really important part is that they both ensure that there's no double counting of renewable energy, so that we have an accurate, consistent, and transparent analysis of how much emissions we're actually producing in our state. And I'll get more into that in a second. Third, they both increase local renewable energy. They don't rely on kind of resting on the laurels of some old nuclear energy that many of the munis have bought into. And yeah, basically they both say that all of our electricity means all of our electricity, and we're all here working together towards our collective common goals. Both of these bills do allow the munis to create their own plan if needed, and I think that really allows for any concerns about munis' different business model to be addressed while assuring accountability. Next slide, please. So I put the bill number in there, but the bill numbers do change. So trying to keep up to date with the content of the bill and the name of the bill. This one's really long. Basically, it was submitted, or it was written by the Municipal Electric Association of Massachusetts. They're primarily a lobbying group of municipal utilities. There are many problems with this bill. I'm going to try and speed up my talk so we have time for enough questions. The biggest problem is the undermining of our regional energy tracking system, aka double counting. And this is a huge problem for everyone, no matter if you're in a municipal utility or not, because one, it would put our data analysis off track, and two, it would really open the floodgates for, if munis can do that, why can't everyone do that? And then we might as well not have the energy tracking system that we currently have. It also has a line in there about it's an 80% by 2050 goal, and it would exempt them from all future Global Warming Solutions Act programs. So that would try and negate the 100% and 2050 bills because they would be only required to meet 80% while everyone else was updated to 100% renewable energy by 2035 or net zero by 2050. Yeah, and then the enforceability, it's the munis are able to put their alternative compliance payments for not meeting the standards that they laid out in this bill. They pay into a fund that they manage individually themselves, which isn't a very good incentive for not meeting a standard. That's like if you had to pay taxes, but you paid them into a fund yourself. I guess it's a little bit of a thing. There's also a 9-year delay in reporting. So if they did miss the standards that they were supposed to meet, nobody would know until almost a decade later. And by then, it's kind of too late for the climate. The next slide, please. So just a little bit more about the double counting issue. I combed through the numbers of our research for our report, and my estimate, a lowball estimate is they're selling 761,000 megawatt hours right now, and that bill would allow them to claim that. So we would be missing that many megawatt hours of, we would have that many megawatt hours of polluting energy that we think is not polluting in our state when we're tracking our goals. So there's 2 resources on this page. The first link is our explainer about renewable energy certificates, and the second is an outside source which explains some of the Federal Trade Commission guidelines on this practice, which state that it is considered false and deceptive marketing. Basically, you can see in the image on the left, 1 megawatt hour of wind energy is produced, the electrons go into the grid, and a certificate stating that 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy exists goes into our computer data system. Only one person can claim 1 megawatt hour, or one utility or organization. So the double counting issue means that 2 utilities are claiming that megawatt hour. And that's where I'll end it. So we have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Oriana. And we're going to open it up now for our discussion. And I think looks like we have plenty of activity going on in the chat window. So if you do have a question, please feel free to type that in. But the first question I saw came from Janet Bowser. And the question was about how can grassroots organizations like MCAN or any other community-based grassroots organization help to move any of these bills forward. And Rep. Moschino, you had gone into some detail about that. So I want to go to Rep. Benson, if you could help talk about from your view how grassroots organizations like MCAN can help move these bills forward.
Hi, yeah. So I think so far the grassroots have been doing a lot of great work. I think that's one of the major reasons we nearly doubled our co-sponsorship, is because so many people reached out to their reps and senators. So I think that's excellent. I think we need to continue to do that to make sure that people understand how important this is. But I think even more importantly, I think we need to reach out to our neighbors, whether that's through letters to the editor, you know, social media posts and others. I think we need to really get people who maybe aren't as engaged in these sorts of issues educated around why this is important, and they can help not only provide some political pressure on elected officials, but also some political cover for those who might be leaning towards supporting something like this, but worried that they will get blowback in their districts. I think it's really important for the public to be there with us as we're making this decision, and I think it really helps to for folks to be able to reach out to their neighbors and that sort of thing.
Thank you. So we have a question here. I think it's for both Oriana and Rep. Moschino, but Rep. Moschino, I'm going to give it to you first. Could you talk a little bit about any issue that any of the municipal light plants might have with your Roadmap 2050 bill?
So I think it makes them a little nervous. If you are a municipal official and you understand that essentially these function much as enterprise funds do, and they are their own separate entities, and what they do is they work through either MWIC or PNE to procure power. And when they buy power, unlike say privately owned utility, which would procure power, say 6 months, 9 months, the municipal light plants, what they do is they procure 5 years, 10 years out. So by putting them into the same regulations as a privately owned power company, it wouldn't necessarily work for their business model, which is to say you could conceivably require them to do something, let's say go 100% renewable, when they still have contracts that are 10 years out or even sometimes the life of a project. And so you would be hitting them with impossible fees and would really undermine their business model. And when I say it's important, these municipally owned electric companies actually do a great job in terms of their infrastructure, keeping rates low and affordable for everybody, maintaining the system. So there's some real benefits to the municipal model, but there's also some unique things that are very different than, say, an Eversource or a National Grid. And that was why I was talking about that we want them to be included. And in fact, they want to be included. I mean, a lot of these municipal light companies are moving in that direction already. The economics of it work well. But they do have special considerations. And so that's why we thought it was important that they participate, that they be regulated. But if they need to have a different plan, and quite frankly, if they needed 41 individual plans, as long as they're moving towards the 2050 net zero goal, that works for me.
Thank you. Oriana, anything to follow up with that?
Let's see. I think if you're wondering, so on our web page, I'll type it into the chat. There's on our media section, there's a really nice column written by a resident of Ipswich, where she described kind of the process of how the bill that we don't really like was filed. And basically the muni managers only had like 2 days to approve it. So it's not necessarily that all munis don't want to be included in the roadmap to 2050, but the bill, one of the bills that got filed, kind of has a different approach than the roadmap to 2050 bill. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I've got.
Okay. Rep. Benson, we had a question here that I think is probably most well directed towards you. Could you talk a little bit about how your bill works with the Regi program, which works on the electric sector, and also the Transportation Climate Initiative, which we heard on our last webinar? How the three of those would work together, or how your bill would work with those two?
Sure. So my bill carves out the electrical generation sector that's covered under Regi, so it kind of works or wraps around that. And I would imagine if TCI were to pass before we passed a carbon price, or even after, we could carve that out as well. And then, so the carbon price would then be on sort of buildings. So it's pretty simple.
Great. Okay. And then we just had one other question come in. If you do have any more questions, we do have a few more minutes here. But I think this is a tricky question, especially with a lot of the messaging going on, and this is a messaging question. But could you speak, Rep. Benson, to the messaging around carbon pricing and how this is different from, I would say, the opposition frames carbon pricing with what we would call a tax, and how this is different and how we should be talking about this in a more positive light?
Sure. Well, you know, it's sort of semantics, whatever you call it. The fact is you're getting a rebate, and not only are you getting a rebate, but your municipality, your community will be getting money to support reducing its energy consumption as well, which then in turn you know, lowers that pressure on property taxes, for example. So it really is a tool rather than just a tax. It's going into its own transparent fund, so the funds coming in, the funds going out are easy to track and easy to ensure that they're going toward exactly what we want it to go toward. So I think, you know, it's not going into the general fund of the Commonwealth, and so, you know, I think it's an easier conversation to have with people to show, yes, it's going to actually be used to reduce our carbon footprint here in Massachusetts.
Great. So more of an investment than anything else.
Sure.
We just have one other question come in, and we do have a few minutes left here. And I think I saw you answer this earlier in the chat room. But carbon pricing versus incentivizing clean energy. All for one, or a mixed approach to everything we can do?
Well, I think we've got to, you know, this is a huge problem, so it's going to take lots of solutions. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think this works in tandem. The other thing that it does is it helps us to find a way to fund incentivization. That's something we struggle with right now. So, so I see this working in tandem with many other policies, laws, programs in order to really get to a net zero place.
Thank you. Rep. Mosquito, we have a question here for you, and I think this is someone asking you to stress the importance of there being an actual plan and how your bill differs or changes the original GWSA program so that there is a plan now. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, great question. So the difference, the update that I'm proposing is to actually require the administration to do the backcast analysis. Right now, they've expressed an interest in it, but there's no actual requirement for them to just do the math. And to Rep. Benson's point just a few minutes ago, I think part of the problem has been is that as you're trying to evaluate strategies and across different sectors, it's hard to make choices about, you know, should we carbon price, should we create incentives? It's hard to think about how that might play out and what might be most effective when, depending on what the actual plan is. They have to do the planning. And I focus a lot on saying people-centered plan, but the fact of the matter is we just need a plan, and we need to figure out, you know, how does electrification of the grid fit in? How does carbon capture? I mean, it really should be from the energy production all the way through the built environment, all the way through the natural environment. We should be using all of those elements to get to the net zero. And, you know, the net zero, that's a pretty aggressive goal. It's not actually that much further than the 80% of the 1990 levels, But what it's saying is that we want to go all that way, and we're going to have to fit all of these pieces like a puzzle together to achieve that net zero. And so I think the planning and forcing the administration to actually do it and do it publicly will show us then where we can glean the benefits of all of these strategies, from everything from, electric vehicles all the way up to carbon pricing.
Thank you for that answer. This does bring us right up to our 8 o'clock deadline or stop line here, so I do recognize we had a couple of questions, but we are unfortunately out of time. Thank you, Representative Benson, Representative Moschino, and Oriana for joining us tonight. I appreciate the time that you've given to all of us, and also want to remind everyone that our third and final webinar in these legislative conversations series will be taking place in 3 weeks, and we will be talking about the environmental justice bills regarding toxics, citing, and also the 100% renewable bill. This webinar will be posted online on our YouTube channel and on our website. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to having you back again in a few weeks. Thank you.